Yo, what up? Welcome to another episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast. I'm Patrick, flying solo. So, the Warriors are on a 3-game winning streak. They beat the Portland Trailblazers 123-105 at Chase Center in a game they were actually down by 23 in. And man, this season is just so weird. I looked it up. The Warriors, this is only their fourth winning streak of 3 games this season. Their longest winning streak was that stretch in January that went 5 games. So they had a 3-game winning streak, a 5-game winning streak, a 3-game winning streak, and then again, a 3-game winning streak. And for comparisons, last season, they had 8 winning streaks of, at least 3 games. And some of those went 7 games, 8 games, 9 games. So we obviously know that this season has been really, really rough, and it's still going. But, it's just a stark difference from a year ago. That being said, I talked about how this stretch, the reevaluation after the All-Star break, they said for Steph was going to be at least after 4 games. And we're like, can you get to 3-1 in that stretch? And after that first Lakers game where they just got smushed in LA, it was like, okay, maybe not. But you knew they could take the Rockets. You knew at home they could take the Wolves and the Blazers, who had beaten the Warriors in Portland last time. You knew that you could always, there's always a shot against those teams. But it's just a question of how the Warriors show up and, how they execute, their focus, all that stuff, all those things that have been waning all season long. And at the beginning of this one, it looked bad. It looked terrible. They got down by 14 in the first quarter, 23 in the first half. And it was like, well, maybe I'll just press mute and put this on in the background. The highlight for me was the Pittsburgh High School marching band that was on League Pass. And I was like, all right, good for those kids as the halftime show. But then in the third quarter, they found the switch and they flipped it, right? They flipped that switch, and they'd been outscored in the first quarter, 41-27. Third quarter, they flipped it 39-17, and they just kept going. It was like the fourth quarter, they outscored the Blazers 36-23. So it became a blowout in the other direction. And they did this, of course, without Steph and then without Andrew Wiggins. But hey, this is what we've kind of been waiting for. And pump the brakes. I'm not going to say, okay, everything's fixed, everything's cured. They are now ready to compete for a title, right? Like I've said, don't want to get too high, don't want to get too low, whether it's a loss or it's a win. But there were signs, there were signs of 2 things, signs of that lack of focus and lack of energy and lack of execution. And then the signs of flipping that switch and having that dominance and being able to access it. There's 20 games left in the season. The Warriors are currently, if you believe this, in 5th place in the West, which is really, really wild. But, they're also, they're 1 game out of 4th, but they're also 1 game out of 8th and 2 games out of 10th. So this could go, awry right back the other way just as quickly as they've kind of gone up after a couple games. And the schedule gets a little rough. It gets a little rough. They get the Clippers at home, but then they get the Pelicans, who don't have Zion, who they've been struggling a little bit. And then they go back to LA, play the Lakers. And we all know that LeBron is out at least for 2 to 3 weeks with a foot injury. You don't want anyone to have an injury, but it is what it is. You play the guys out there, but that makes it hopefully more likely that the Warriors will show up as opposed to, a couple weeks ago. So things are a little bit promising. Then they go to OKC, who has given the Warriors problems, but the Warriors have always prevailed. And then they go to Memphis, which is going to be tough. But, we all know the Warriors can get these games, but we also know that they can lay a stinker. But I'm hoping that what they showed in the second half of this Portland game is something that they can actually, now that's a fresher memory in their mind. You know what I mean? Now they know that they can bear down, buckle down, and execute. I said, not going to expect the Warriors to just blow through teams all of a sudden and win a bunch of games, but you want to get greedy. 20 games is not a lot. And with Steph, hopefully, seemingly, all signs point to his rehab, whatever, going pretty well. And he should be back soon. So that will be a boon. And, with him out, it's one of those things where, just like when he was out with his shoulder, are they going to sink or swim? Are guys going to step up and take responsibility, take more ownership, all that stuff, grow up? And in this one, and, for the most part, people have talked about how Clay, who isn't the most vocal guy, has stepped up and he's doing other things and he's found his shot. And that is going to be helpful down the road. But let's not start predicting a 10-game winning streak or anything like that, but just seeing places on the schedule where the Warriors can just steal wins, squirrel away wins. If all of a sudden they turn into world beaters, then it's like, oh yeah, see, told you so, right? People are going to say that, but I guess then the regular season really doesn't matter. But we'll take it one game at a time, as I've said. But the reality is the Warriors still haven't put it together from beginning to end, right? We saw stretches where they would come out and, kind of dominate teams, but then cough up leads. This was the opposite, right? It was them playing like trash and then turning it on. So if they can put those efforts together beginning and end, then we're good to go. You know what I mean? That's what we want to see. They know what it takes to play defense, but are they going to start falling back into some of those old habits, that those bad habits that we've seen this whole season, to be honest? Who knows? Maybe they see the prize at the end, right? Like the light at the end of the tunnel, because it's a long season, 82 games, right? But like when you sit there, you're in fifth place and you're kind of in control, for the most part, of what you can do and where you end up. So do they see 20 games? They're like, okay, the vets, the guys who won the title last year, who were around, are they like 20 games? Let's go. That's what you hope for. If that's the case, remind me to tune in next season when there's 20 games left instead of at the very beginning. So have they found that missing thing? Because this is not how they were winning games before, as I had said. And you could tell from the outset in this one, Portland, they came out with energy. They were younger, quicker, more bouncy, faster, whatever. And the Warriors just looked stuck in the mud, right? But what happened in the second half is kind of what often happens in theory in games like this, where the Warriors will bear down, execute, tighten up some of their mistakes, and the other team will fold because that youth and bounciness turns into mistakes and indecision and just getting out of their mental game and whatnot. And that's what happens when the Warriors flex their championship DNA, to be honest. So can they keep doing that? And can they take that all the way to the end of the season, into the postseason, if they are consistent enough? This game was kind of like a microcosm of the season, hopefully, kind of struggling and having these weird low energy moments. And then all of a sudden turning it on. I mean, that's what we want from here on out, but we'll see. Like I said, this game was the opposite of what they'd been doing all season long. But, you look at the Wolves game, it was similar, right? They got behind, down by 14, and then turned it on. This game was much the same, but just kind of, the dial was turned up a little bit more. It's a positive, again, like now they're on a 3-game winning streak. I had said, man, if they get on a 4-game winning streak, that would be crazy. So they could. They're almost there, but they got to get through the Clippers. But the reason why the West is so packed together, and I've never seen it like this. There have been times where there's maybe a handful of teams, like 4 teams that are vying for the same rough spots in the standings, but never from like basically 5 to 13. That's wild to me. You know what I mean? So the reason why it's like that is because, no team is super consistent in that patch. So whatever team is more consistent and the healthiest, they're the ones that are going to rise up. And I've always said, let's get this team into the tournament healthy. And the other plus of Steph being out, I mean, I know it was a leg injury, right? And he's been beat up a little bit this season, but at least he's getting some rest. You know what I mean? And that is always a good thing. And that was kind of the recipe a little bit for last season, where Steph went out in that Boston game last year and Poole stepped up. Clay got some rhythm with Poole. Poole got some rhythm with Draymond. And then Steph came back. At this point, Steph's going to come back earlier than he did last season. And that's actually a good thing, right? Because there were questions last season when Steph came back that the playoffs were starting immediately, So again, those are the positives, and we'll see if they can start stitching together consistent performances, right? It was thrilling in the second half of this one. It was crazy, but can they really, really put it together? Because even though it was questionable whether or not they could beat the Wolves or the Blazers, at the end of the day, they're going to have to build up and actually beat much, much better teams with better players and more veteran, more tested players for the most part. Jonathan Kuminga, I've said, and I'll repeat this again, I've said that since he was drafted, when he was drafted, I was like, oh, he'll be the Warriors' best player in like 4 years. And that's like a couple years from now. And, that really depends on how good Steph is still. So Kuminga might not be their best player, but I think that he has a chance to be like one of their top 2 players, to be honest. Just imagine how much better he'll be when he's 22 and has all this seasoning. And he's a guy that can obviously score at all 3 levels, mid-range, 3, and at the basket. But if he can get consistent with that mid-range, I mean, there was that one play where he tagged somebody with the dribble and kind of dribbled it behind his back and then went up and hit a mid-range 2 from just beyond the elbow. And I was like, oh, okay. I remember from his rookie season how people would say he was being given tape of like Paul Pierce to look at. Paul Pierce famously shot a lot of mid-rangers around the elbow and whatnot. So if Kuminga can access that and make that a real threat, I mean, just a few games ago, right? The Lakers, they didn't guard him at the 3 and it worked for the Lakers. So he doesn't have that consistency yet from all the different spots, but we know that he can hit those shots. And a lot of it is just reps in the off season and muscle memory, right? So if he can nail his 3, if he can nail the mid-range, that just makes his drive to the basket that much more dangerous. And of course, he has to tighten his handle because as we've seen, his go-to is to drive to the paint and pump fake and pivot. Oftentimes it works. Oftentimes it gets predictable to some guys who are looking for it. But if he can hit that mid-ranger, then that just makes him more potent. Again, tightening up the handle will be big because a lot of his turnovers are driving in and then guys just, picking it out of his hand. So I am very, very high on that. And obviously that massive dunk he had, man, I always thought that he'd be solid in the dunk contest, but I guess that's not a thing that anyone does. So, again, love that guy. Please don't trade him. don't trade him over the summer. I really just don't want that. That would be a real shame. Obviously, they didn't want to trade him at the trade deadline, but I think that anyone you get for him, you will regret it as soon as game 1 of next season, and some people may say, oh, well, it's about this season, but I come on. Donte DiVincenzo, once again, I said it last episode, he is a dude that I'm really going to miss. He's going to price himself out. He already has priced himself out of the Warriors' ability to pay him. And also they committed to Gary Payton II, who, obviously they are kind of playing the same spot. Gary Payton II will be taking these minutes next year, but Donte DiVincenzo, man, that guy, I've said it recently, he is the perfect fourth guard. But, when you're paying guards like Steph and Clay and Poole, you can't pay fourth guard whatever he's going to get on the market, right? If your fourth guard is Gary Payton II, even though he plays like a center in the offensive scheme, then that's more palatable to your salary cap structure. If your fifth guard is Ryan Rollins or Moses Moody, then that's still palatable because they're still cheap, But it is what it is, man. That guy is just a solid player, a stable force on the team. And I mean, his three has become so consistent by this time. And it's something that it's a shame. It's a shame. Like I said, after the Wolves game, it just feels like he's passing through. But, he has championship DNA from Villanova, from Milwaukee. I think it'd be great if he could stick around. But this is just really not possible. It's totally different from the Gary Payton scenario last summer, because Payton was not going to get as much as DiVincenzo is going to get. And DiVincenzo deserves to be like a third guard somewhere. You know what I mean? Good for him. Big fan of that dude. And hopefully he contributes to a long playoff run. Again, don't want to get too far ahead of myself on that, but this is really solid. And we'll see. Like I said, the Warriors get the Clippers on Thursday, and then they get the Pelicans. Then they go to LA to play the Lakers again. Then the Thunder and Memphis. That's the next 5. Can they go at least 3-2 in that stretch? I definitely think they can. I look at that New Orleans game at home, that LeBron-less Lakers game, and then the OKC game. Those are 3 they could take if they are serious, if they're really showing out to be who they are, if they're really ramping up over these final 20 games. So fingers crossed. Hopefully Thursday, it's not like, well, we're back to where we were. You know what I mean? It's like being at 500 is like this magnetic force. It's like a tractor beam that keeps pulling the Warriors back. So, is what it is. All right.